So just moving towards the tail end of the sort of thing you've been describing, the systems you're building this way, do you still have customers saying, I want an overview page, a dashboard, where you're starting to compose lots of summary information together in one place? And if you do, both from an event modeling perspective and also from your billing perspective, how do you do that composition? So for example, let's say I had a dashboard, it had top 10 X's, highest value Y's, users that have done X, Y, and Z. Do you break those down into individual components, or do you assemble all the information into a single read model? And does that similarity extend into your costing model as well, your resourcing and costing?
Yeah, we break those down.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Absolutely. So like a dashboard may have a ton of information. And if you were to make that one read model, that'd be some poor sucker stuck working on that for 3 months, getting paid $2,000, right? So no, all those things are composed of, individual read models. If the implementation, can be kind of done a different way to, perhaps for performance reasons, to have it all as a bunch of joins of separate SQL calls, SQL queries. That's why the event model is it tries to be independent of the implementation. So you can, a good example is some of these read models are not persisted. They may be in memory. Sometimes they may be just in variables. But the idea is that you're talking about how information gets composed, how it transforms. And so that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with information systems, and all the development stuff is adjusted to make sure those SLAs are met and people are seeing what they're expecting to see on those screens at those times. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, a lot of customers try to game stuff. Like the bad actors will always try to stuff everything in one slice. There was one example I have was, and this is an argument about fat events versus slim events and all that, but sort of related. What I would say is, what I would say happens is that people want to have, the example I was going to give is sending a message in an application where there's a chat feature, and you're supposed to filter out bad words and spam links. And so on the event model, it was presented as send message, and then the event that got persisted was cleaned message. I'm like, no, wait a second. There's a lot of state transitions here. First of all, you need to localize, you need to tokenize that message, you need to cross-reference it against these interpretations. And if you look at it, you basically say, you identify the jerks in this that are trying to game the system very quickly, because you can see that this is what's happening. And a lot of times they say, well, I don't know how to do that. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm telling you how to do that. This is the only way to do this, is by showing you that these are the different languages that you can express these swear words in, and this is how we're going to have to map them. And we cannot do this without the mapping to these different dictionaries of words and grammatical lookups or whatever else the library is that's available out there, or service if you're integrating it. It has to be shown. But I think there is that middle management piece, and even probably would go up to some of the upper management, where they're trying to game that to get more out of you for less, because they see that as a bargaining thing. It's like, this is a transparency thing, so we can collaborate. It's not a bargaining thing. And if you're using it to make your your $100,000 project a $50,000 project because you can get these suckers to work for less, well, we don't want to work with you. It's just that simple. So it makes those kinds of things obvious. Yeah, here, give me a dashboard with like 50 queries glued together for two grand. Sure, whatever. Next.
Yeah, the thing I realized I missed something was that I hadn't considered the possibility that you had multiple read models feeding into the same user interface element.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
you could do that. But as I said, your implementation may be one query, but it might be a
Yeah.
giant query, but it's really not fair to the person that's working to get
Yeah.
paid, you know, the tiny sum when they clearly see that it's composed of a lot of logical kind of decisions and permutations of what you need to do with that data. So it's about being fair and transparent. And that's what I love about this, is that it allows you to just have a platform where I say, well, you know what, I'm just going to make a giant space in the workflow, because this little piece that you have here is hiding
Yeah.
all this stuff. So you just like drag to the left everything to make space and say, this is what's happening here. Why are you expecting me to do this for so little money and you think it's going to be so little effort? And this gets rid of that, well, what's an extra large t-shirt size and all this kind of stuff that's subjective in planning sessions in Agile, right? You don't want to have like, oh, my feeling is that this is going to be extra large. Like, give me something concrete. Show me why it's a large piece of work, and then just do it in slices. And so that's why all this like you know, that's why all the iterations not just go out the window. These artificial things are not needed, because you have a definite understanding of what the system's doing and how it's composed together of all of these little you know, how you slice up this information system, how do you look at each requirement, right?
So I guess you're trying to converge on the idea that each part, each individual artifact in your model, or transition between artifacts, is kind of unit size. You're trying to get to the point where it's kind of just joining up the dots, and it's unit size. There's no hidden complexities or hidden scope. You're trying to break everything down to as close to unit size as possible when it's possible.
Yeah, you're trying to show how the system changes over time, because that's the best way to understand a system. Is like, just, this is why we, you know, a lot of people like debugging, because they can see what's in the variable as they go. That's why they add logging statements. It's why in event sourcing, it's why we love the fact that there is a set of events that led up to whatever state we're in, and that makes it way easier for us. So the event model is just doing that. It's using that way of being able to, like, you know, you said a lot of things there. Let's slice up to see what actually happens if we try to do this, and use something concrete instead of just back and forth words with, you know, use cases that may or may not convey that well. So yeah. Now let's see. There's one more question here from Andreas, who's been awfully quiet this session, but let's see what he says. General ES question: in order to check idempotency, would you reuse causation ID, or would you use a dedicated ID? Okay, so idempotency is meaning that if I turn off the system and I'm stuck kind of somewhere along this timeline, and I turn the system back on, it's going to pick up whatever was on a to-do list, and it might send a command twice. Or it might resend an event to the read models again. Idempotency means that it doesn't matter that it's received twice. So idempotency means that I should be able to recover, the system should be able to recover and scale, and other concerns when, you know, there's a retry, or just because the system was, you know, these servers that you might have are being upgraded. So you take one down and you put it up again, might have received a message twice, an event twice. How to do that? So
yeah, not necessarily what it is, but if you have kind of any thought against using the causation ID for that, as we typically have causation ID and correlation ID. So the question was,
yeah, I mean, these are
using causation ID to check for idempotency.
I need an example to give a better answer, but I think causation.
You mentioned the commands, right?
Yeah.
So, a command triggered by the UI, and the user, oh, that's taking so long, clicky again, and kind of 3 commands are being sent.
Yeah. So here's a question. You know, is causation ID good enough just to have as part of your? I guess causation ID is used where you have multiple steps to do something. It's not just one kind of a slice where in this case, I'm just adding, I'm adding, in my case that I showed here with the time tracking thing, there's really no like need for a causation ID because I'm just adding a time entry, and it either works or it doesn't, and it's done. So I don't really have a place for causation ID in here. If I have a multiple step process like booking a trip, to have a classic example, my causation ID is probably the initial thing where I start to say start planning my trip. Obviously there's a causation ID. The start planning has that ID that's going to now be it's going to cause the next thing, so it's going to get referenced back. Correlation ID, on the other hand, could be there as well, which is going to be in all the messages in that chain for doing that. Although I know Greg likes to use them, I see these to-do lists as giving me enough information as to what happened and what's related to what. There's no problem in adding them in your implementation to do that. But the item potency part, I think, is the important piece, because that's going to, a lot of times that's handled by the infrastructure or the boilerplate code you have from other projects that's already going to take care of the fact that this read model already had that event, and so it just ignores it.
I guess it's more relevant in orchestration scenarios where commands
like sagas, all that stuff, right?
Executed more than once. When you have choreography, let's say subsystems communicating via messaging, I mean, typically if you have a event ID or kind of a sequence number, you would store, okay, I've processed this event anyways, and then kind of have this deduping and resequencing thing that you might want to do always in this case. So I guess it's more relevant in orchestration scenarios when sending commands, maybe.
Generally the to-do lists do that easily. So like, let's say you're dealing with Kafka and you have some out of order receiving problem. A lot of times you can reserve a spot for it that the overall piece is not ready to be published because you're missing a previous one. And so this is where you do the serialization for your read model. When you get the missing piece, you can simply replay all the messages you have now up to that point. It depends really on the read model, because sometimes the fact that they're out of order, that's fine. You may have a line in your read model that can be updated and they can be received out of order in terms of sequencing. So I guess there's a core set of kind of scenarios that you could think of, but there's many gray areas in between, like what, sometimes you need ordered, sometimes you need this item potency. Sometimes when you get something twice, maybe especially a command, you might trigger some alert somewhere, but these are higher level patterns that I don't think happen often enough. Some of them might, that we simply put them at the view pattern in to-do lists in event modeling, so that if you have a specific type of to-do list or view where you may or may not be as sensitive to things being out of order or sent twice, you might do something as put in an extra entry in that read model saying there is this thing you should worry about, and it belongs in that read model because it's concerned with that view of those things. I think sometimes dead letter queues and things like that muddy the water there, because you try to push that stuff into infrastructure where it actually is a business concern, and you can have a processor to then go and look at things that have that are in that particular read model that weren't expected, and maybe that does trigger an alert that's going to go out to people's what's it called, pagers or whatever, whoever's on duty that's going to have to check what happened there. Might be a fraud thing, who knows. So yeah, I'm not too married to all the stuff that's the traditional enterprise architecture patterns. I think first of all, I don't want the business people to have to read that book. It's just not going to help. So I need to say the same things without talking about correlation ID and causation ID. I might mention them depending on the audience, but I certainly don't want them to have to understand those patterns to be able to talk about an information system. I should be able to show by example what happens when, hey, you know what, I can tell the business that these things might happen out of sequence, or these things might happen twice or look like they happened twice because someone pulled the power or we upgraded something, and this information might come here twice for a good reason. And they should understand it's their business. And
yeah,
we're not talking
you
about
wouldn't use
technical
those names,
thing.
of course, talking to business. That's rather implementation detail, I would say.
I don't know. It really depends.
I mean,
That's
it is
I
a
wouldn't.
business decision, but talking about causation IDs, correlation IDs, and the like, I mean, this is more for developers and not so much for business people. You would use.
Yeah, I mean, as you're
terms.
developing the things, you can definitely use those in the event sourced system. So yeah, it's really independent. But I think it's important to show whether if you're leaning on these things heavily, to still be able to go back to the event model and show why you may or may not have extra slices in, and because that's who's paying for it is the business, and they should actually see example information of like why they're paying an extra 10 grand for something, because there are specific views that support reporting of outages or reporting of anomalies or things like that. So while yes, you're right, I don't want to confuse them with those things. It should, if it's information and state changes that can occur and possibilities in the state of the system where there are things published twice at some point, then yeah, you need to communicate that. And you don't need to get into how the implementation works, but you certainly should show that we have extra steps here because this is, maybe it's a ticketing system for buying tickets online. When the sale when the concert goes on sale, we have scalability issues because we have 10,000 people hitting F5, and when it's refreshed, they're all trying to book. So here's why this system costs more than the other one. Right?
Let's take this scenario. You have a read model with one item that's, let's say, a summary. Either the number of orders or time entries, some kind of summary. Would you have, along with that, at least in case you would want to store causation/correlation IDs, would you have a list of those tuples along with that item in the read model, or?
Yeah, you could. It doesn't mean you have to show them. I mean, you could.
No,
you could have a different screen. Of course
not to show them.
But you could show them. Why not?
Yeah, maybe for admins, but not for.
Well, I'll give you a real example of where that actually helped. Our guys were working at one particular company where they had made CQRS event source systems for some ads for, I think, cars or boats or something. And when there were issues, people would call customer support because they included some of that stuff in the events and information in general. Customer support was able to give them a lot of information to the point of saying, like, there's a problem in this specific system, and this is what the problem is. And they were able to give that ability to have a fix in less than 4 hours to that organization because they had that extra information. They just, the customer service rep basically just copy pasted what was, what the error was or what the system had on a particular screen to a developer, and they're like, oh, well, I know exactly where to fix that. Whereas I don't think if you left that information out, it might have taken a little longer to get to it, right? So
okay, but you might not show that all the time, but just with a kind of reveal extra info, or just
yeah, like a little plus button.
Error. Yeah, okay, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Detail, like a little detail button that just expands, and they can copy paste all of that stuff.
An error happened. There's this tracking ID. Use this to contact customer support or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's information, whether it's displayed or not.